Carl Jung's key: you can't heal until you understand your mother. Every one of us carries a silent wound. It's invisible to the world, but speaks constantly in our decisions, our relationships, our fears, our ambitions. And at the heart of this wound, Carl Jung tells us, is a truth most people never dare to confront. You cannot truly heal, grow, or become whole until you understand your mother, not just the woman, but the symbol, the force. The psychological architecture she imprinted in your soul before you even had language to describe pain. And no, this is not about blaming her. This is about seeing her clearly, because healing isn't about blame. It's about truth. And Jung knew something most people still don't. The human psyche is not just shaped by what happens to us, it is shaped by how we experience what happens, and more importantly, how we interpret the role of the people who were our gods in early life. For most of us, our mother was that first god, the one who gave life, or who withheld warmth, the one who made us feel safe, or who made the world feel dangerous, or perhaps more tragically, the one who did both.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
When you look in the mirror and ask, why do I sabotage my relationships? Why do I fear closeness? Why can't I rest or trust or let go? You're not asking about logic. You're asking about origin. You're asking about programming. Jung believed that the maternal imprint is not just an influence, it's a blueprint. And until you study the architecture of that inner mother in your psyche, you are destined to live out her unfinished story as your own. And here's the wild part, it's not even just about your mother as a person. It's about the archetype of the mother, the one you built in your subconscious from 1,000 interactions, from the way she looked at you when you cried, and from the way she showed or didn't show affection when you needed it most, from the way her love made you feel safe or guilty or invisible. These are not just memories, they're emotional laws. And you live by them every day, whether you realize it or not. Why do you chase unavailable partners? Why do you panic when someone gets too close? Why do you feel more comfortable suffering than receiving? These aren't habits. They are echoes of the way you learn to earn love. Because if your earliest experience of love required you to shrink, perform, fix, or disappear, then deep down, you think that's what love is. You think love equals effort. You think peace equals danger. And you run from what's calm because chaos feels like home. Jung's work on the mother complex wasn't just clinical, it was spiritual. He understood that without integrating the mother archetype consciously, we project her everywhere, onto lovers, onto teachers, onto the world itself. And here's the danger. When we don't face the truth of what our inner mother taught us, we become stuck. Stuck in loops, stuck in fear, stuck in recreating pain not because we want to, but because we think it's familiar, and familiarity always pretends to be safety. But what if the very pattern you think is your personality is just a memory your body never learned to stop reliving? That's what Jung asked us to explore. Not with anger, not with accusation, but with courage, with curiosity, with the terrifying honesty of someone who wants to break free more than they want to stay comfortable. Because healing your relationship with your inner mother doesn't always mean reconciling with the woman herself. It means facing the version of her that lives in you. The one who whispers, "You're only loved if you serve. You're only worthy if you earn it." And the moment you see that voice for what it is, not a truth, but a trauma, that's when something changes. That's when your adult self can speak to your wounded self and say, you don't have to live like this anymore. So I'll ask you, who was your mother to you before you had words? Before you had rebellion? Before you had defenses? What did her love teach you about your worth? What did her absence teach you about being invisible? These aren't just poetic questions. They are the lock and the key. Because every time you react in ways that confuse you, pulling away when someone gets too close, overworking to feel safe, craving validation you can never seem to hold, it's not about the present moment. It's about a loop from the past. A script your nervous system learned to run long before you knew it was a script. And if you don't rewrite that script, you will spend your life performing someone else's pain. So Jung didn't just ask us to heal the mother. He asked us to meet her, to understand the way she shaped the soil in which our psyche grew. Because if the soil was toxic, then of course the branches twist. But that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you were brilliant enough to adapt. Now, you must be bold enough to evolve. Writing the womb, how your psyche repeats her pain until you break the pattern. We live inside stories we don't even know we're telling. These stories often began before we ever spoke a word, before we had the tools to think critically or defend ourselves. Carl Jung understood this profoundly. He realized that the unconscious mind doesn't operate with logic, it operates with symbols, emotions, and ancient emotional memories. And one of the deepest and most unspoken forces in this landscape is the internalized mother, the one whose moods, behaviors, and emotional patterns form the code you now use to interpret the entire world. Imagine a child crying and no one comes. That experience doesn't end when the child stops crying. It transforms. It mutates into beliefs like, my needs are a burden, or no one hears me, or even worse, I don't deserve to be heard. That belief isn't left behind in childhood. It moves forward with you. It becomes the silent architect behind adult behaviors that look like people-pleasing, chronic overgiving, or staying in one-sided relationships. And here's the twist. Many of these self-sabotaging tendencies feel like our personality. They feel familiar, comfortable, ours. But what if they aren't you at all? What if they're echoes of your mother's unresolved pain, internalized in the way a sponge soaks up water? Because if your mother didn't know how to validate herself, if she only felt loved when she was self-sacrificing or invisible, then that energy becomes a kind of inheritance and emotional DNA you carry forward without question. This is what Jung meant when he warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. So let's pause and ask the uncomfortable but necessary question, are you still trying to fix something for your mother inside the relationships you choose? Are you unconsciously trying to make peace with her by winning love from people who treat you the way she did when you were vulnerable? These patterns are not random, they are repetitions. And the more unresolved pain your mother carried, the more likely it is that you became the vessel for it. Not out of malice, but out of survival. Because children will do anything to maintain attachment to the caregiver, even if that means abandoning their own authenticity. Now, let's be clear, this isn't about vilifying your mother. Most mothers were just repeating what was done to them. They were carrying generational wounds they were never allowed to question. But if they didn't question them, and you don't question them, then the cycle continues. Jung didn't want us to stay stuck blaming. He wanted us to rise into understanding. Because true power doesn't come from pointing fingers, it comes from reclaiming the energy you lost while trying to earn love that should have been freely given. When you start to see how your mother's pain became your pattern, something miraculous happens. You no longer identify with the wound. You start to hold it. You observe it. You ask it, who do you belong to? You start noticing how you say yes when you mean no, or how you apologize for simply existing, or how you feel guilt when resting. And then you trace it not to your weakness, but to your programming. You begin to ask, what did she believe that I swallowed whole? Maybe she believed she had to earn love by doing everything. Maybe she believed her emotions were too much. Maybe she believed being quiet was safer than being real. And if you inherited that script, you might be living her fear instead of your truth. That's the tragedy, but also the opportunity. Because when you bring this to light, you gain a power most people never touch, the power to rewrite your life. Here's the hardest truth to swallow. Healing this means grieving. Grieving the childhood you didn't get. Grieving the mother she couldn't be. Grieving the parts of you that were never mirrored, never validated, never held with warmth. But this grief is not the end, it's the beginning. It is the portal. Because once you stop waiting for the apology that may never come, you can start giving yourself the permission you always needed, permission to matter. Permission to say no. Permission to rest, to feel, to be complex and contradictory and fully human. So I'll ask again, more directly, what are you still trying to prove? And to whom? When you chase achievement or perfection, or a partner who keeps you at arm's length, who are you really chasing? Whose love do you still believe you need in order to be whole? Jung would say, that's your shadow speaking. That's the unconscious trying to complete an ancient emotional equation. But once you see it, you can stop solving for it. You can start living beyond it. And that's the secret nobody talks about. Understanding your mother isn't about her. It's about freeing yourself from the version of you who still thinks her approval is your salvation. Once that illusion breaks, you begin to remember who you were before the pattern. And that person, that essence, is not broken, just buried. The mirror of the wound, why the child you once were still makes your decisions. The most haunting part of our emotional life is that it's rarely about the present moment. What you feel now, what you fear now, what you chase now, it all often echoes something ancient, buried beneath conscious thought. Carl Jung devoted his life to uncovering these layers. He knew the self wasn't a single voice, but a dialogue between many inner characters, the shadow, the anima, the inner child, the wise elder. But perhaps the most tragically overlooked voice is that of the wounded child, especially the child wounded by a mother who couldn't love in the way they needed. And here's the twist, it's that wounded child who often becomes the unspoken commander of your adult life. That child makes your choices in secret, not through logic, but through fear, not through planning, but through panic. They're the part of you that says, if I speak up, I'll be abandoned. Or if I'm not perfect, I'll be punished. Or if I stop performing, I'll disappear. The adult self may be educated, composed, and outwardly successful, but the child self still clutches the wheel. And unless you confront that fact, your life remains a performance for an audience that lives only in your memory. Let's ask the raw question: when did you first learn that love could vanish? That it came with conditions? For many of us, that lesson wasn't taught with words, it was taught with silence, or with withdrawal, with cold stares, with a mother who was overwhelmed, absent, distracted, anxious, or emotionally inconsistent. She may have fed you, clothed you, even said she loved you, but if she couldn't attune to you, to your inner world, then you were left with a terrifying conclusion: there's something wrong with me. And once that belief takes root, everything you do becomes a strategy to cover it up, overachieve. Be nice, stay quiet, don't need too much. Don't cry, don't shout, don't want. You shrink yourself into something manageable, something that won't risk rejection. But what if that very shrinking is the thing causing your depression? What if that's the true source of your anxiety, not failure, not trauma itself, but the daily performance of being someone you're not? Jung understood that healing doesn't come from fixing the surface. It comes from descending into the underworld of the self and facing the parts we've disowned. And the most exiled part, for many, is the one that still longs for a mother's eyes to light up just for them. Not for their success, not for their politeness, but for their essence. Let me ask you something dangerous. What would your life look like if you stopped earning love? Who would you be if you no longer needed anyone to validate your existence? That question terrifies the wounded child, because for them, love was survival. If love was inconsistent, then they had to become hyper-vigilant, hyper-capable, hyper-everything. And now, decades later, they still believe safety comes from being good enough. But here's the awakening: you don't need to be good enough for a mother who didn't see you. You need to be real enough for yourself. And that begins by doing something radical, turning inward and saying to the child within, I see you, I hear you, and I'm not leaving. At first, that sounds cheesy. But the truth is, most of us go our entire lives never feeling truly seen. Not by others, and definitely not by ourselves. We become masters of distraction through work, through relationships, through endless goals that never satisfy the ache. Because the ache doesn't want achievement. It wants acknowledgement. This is why we repeat the same relationships over and over, but why we date emotionally unavailable people, why we burn out trying to please everyone. The unconscious is not cruel. It's just insistent. It will keep replaying the same pain until you finally stop, feel it, and respond to it differently. That's your inner child testing you. Will you abandon me too? And if you pause, if you really pause and say, no, I'm staying, even when you cry, even when you rage, even when you don't perform, something starts to shift. Slowly, quietly, but powerfully. The child begins to trust the adult self. And that trust is the first real foundation of self-worth. So here's the philosophical question: what if healing isn't about becoming someone new, but about becoming someone ancient? The version of you that existed before the mother wound, before the shame, before the world taught you to trade authenticity for attachment. Can you even remember that version? And if not, are you willing to go looking for them? Because the journey is not upward, it's downward, inward, into the soil of the soul. And Jung reminds us, the deeper the roots, the stronger the tree. Your healing won't be loud. It won't always look like progress. Sometimes it will feel like falling apart. But what's really happening is that you're finally returning to the parts of you that were never broken, just buried. The final door, when you face her, you finally find yourself. If we're being honest, most of us are not afraid of failure, chaos, or even death. What we're truly afraid of is one quiet, impossible moment facing our mother, not the literal person, but what she represents within us. She is the first God, the first home, and the first mirror. And if that mirror was cracked, whether through absence, control, fear, or dependency, then the image we formed of ourselves was distorted. And we've been trying to fix that reflection ever since. Jung knew something we've only just started to admit as a culture. The mother is the blueprint. Not just for how we receive love, but for how we relate to the entire world. If her love felt conditional, the world will feel dangerous. If her love felt chaotic, the world will feel unpredictable. If her love was intrusive, the world will feel suffocating. And the most tragic part, we don't question it, we normalize it. We call it reality. But it's not reality. It's a projection, one shaped by a wound we never dared to look at directly. So we build our lives on that distortion. We chase relationships that mimic her, hoping for a different ending. We seek mentors who are critical, lovers who are distant, jobs that overwork us, because deep down, the child in us is still trying to earn the love they never received. Still hoping maybe this time I'll be enough. But what if the real work isn't to chase anything at all? What if it's to sit with that original ache and grieve? Grief is a strange doorway. It doesn't offer answers. It doesn't fix things, but it purifies perception. When you finally let yourself feel the sorrow of not being fully loved, not being fully seen, you stop outsourcing your identity. You stop begging the world to tell you who you are, and you begin to discover something wild, raw, and real underneath the performance. That's where healing lives. Let's go even deeper. Jung believed that healing the mother wound isn't just psychological, it's archetypal. The mother is not only your personal mother, she's also the great mother, the principle of nourishment, protection, destruction, and rebirth. When you understand your personal mother, you begin to understand your entire psychic structure, your fears, your cravings, your compulsions, your gifts. Here's the twist. When you integrate the mother within, you no longer fear being alone. You no longer seek permission to exist. And paradoxically, that's when real connection becomes possible. Because now, you're no longer relating through the wound, you're relating from wholeness, from presence, from truth. This doesn't mean your pain vanishes. It means it transforms. It becomes fuel for empathy, insight, creativity, and depth. You stop performing for love and start radiating it. You stop asking, "Do you see me?" and start declaring, "I see myself." That changes everything. So the final philosophical question is this: can you hold both truths at once? That your mother couldn't give you everything, and yet you are still worthy of everything. Because if you can, then you've passed through the fire. You've walked into the shadow, retrieved your soul, and emerged not as a victim of your past, but as a conscious author of your future. This is not easy. It is brutal, but it is sacred. and it's the only path that leads to real freedom. Carl Jung didn't promise us comfort. He promised us meaning. And perhaps this is what he meant. You can't truly live until you understand what gave you life. And sometimes, understanding begins not with words but with forgiveness. Not just of your mother, but of yourself for ever thinking you were unlovable to begin with.